I'm George. This is Fat Ninja Farm. Some people would call this waste. But it can be used to create surplus. So today we'll talk about compost. How to build a simple compost, what the ingredients are and how to layer them, whether it'll be a hot compost or just a pile of organic matter waiting to break down, how we can create a worm compost out of it, and we'll go into what we do with that compost when we're done with it, whether it's just top dressing the beds or making teas out of it using molasses and a bubbler to create an aerated compost tea, then using that tea to spray on all the leaves and stems and soil around the yard. We spray and fertilize and protect all of our trees and garden beds with it. From here we'll go down and have a look at the ingredients that we use. To start, we can look at just the materials in here. A perfect compost is going to be about 25 to 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Coffee grounds, I believe, are about 30 to 1, or very close to that, so they're almost perfect in their natural state. Fruit waste is about the same, that's 30 to 1. Grass clippings, these are elderberry leaves, very similar, other than the woody stem. These are about 30 to 1, 25 to 1. So that's the perfect ratio by themselves. But when we get into straw and hay and leaves, those are going to be closer to 60 to 80, even 100 to 1. Real heavy on the carbon. Again, we're looking for that 25 to 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So all of these are very close to that ratio. But when we get into straw, leaves, and hay, we're up there around 80 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Here next to the greenhouse, we have ducks and chickens, so there's also this to add to the pile. It's not needed, it's just more matter. The chicken poop, the duck poop, that's giving us a real high nitrogen, so we need lots of carbon. So we also have unsoiled straw to go with it. That'll be heavy carbon. Here we have our food scraps. This one we already looked at. This is the everyday scraps, stays in the kitchen. So this takes a day or two to fill at least, depending on what time of the year it is, how many veggies we're eating. Summertime it may fill in half a day. But that goes out into this one. Stays on the deck, it's got a cover on it. As soon as that fills, we'll generally go out, clean the chicken and duck houses out, collect the materials from there, and build the compost. So maybe once a month or so, depending on the size of that compost at that time, how much material is available, we'll either mix it with an existing pile that we have from the month before or a couple months before that, or we'll start a new one next to it and stir the existing one if it's almost ready. The one I have is close to ready. Needs to be stirred again, and this is a decent sized pile, so I may keep them separate. If not, what I'll do is I'll mix it in there. So in those layers, I'll add some of the existing compost into each layer. So that'll bring that yumminess, to keep it simple, all that healthy bacterial life that's already in there and fungal life that's already in that compost, and get it started in the new compost. What we don't see here is comfrey. We also have a lot of comfrey on the property. I'm going to look at some of that as well. That's a great compost starter. That's another good green for us. So this is comfrey, a permaculturist's best friend. It's a dynamic accumulator. It goes real deep with its taproot. It's able to access those nutrients and minerals that these shallow rooted plants like strawberries around it don't have access to. It stores them in its leaves, and we chop and drop that in place. Or like today, we use it in our compost. It's a great compost starter, a great green element of it. The bees love it, mostly the bumblebees and carpenter bees, more so than the honeybees, I find out. But they'll always be all over it. So up to this point, I've been talking about nitrogen content in each material, whether it be on the extreme side, 400 to 700 to 1, like the wood chips would have when they're fresh, before they started to break down. Or on the heavy opposite side, like the chicken waste, I said we're shooting for that 25 to 30 to 1. It's too much math to do. Like most things on the property here, I use the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't try to outsmart nature. Anything organic piled in a pile is going to break down for us. It's just a matter of time for it. If we want to speed that up, kill the weed seeds that are in there, and create a healthy compost with not many worries, we want it to be a very hot compost. So it needs to reach, the center needs to reach 125 to 160. If it goes much higher than that, it'll start drying it out, ammoniating it, if I'm saying that correctly. You'll see white layers in there. So we don't want to have too much nitrogen to do that, but we want to have enough nitrogen to get that center of the pile up to 145 degrees or so. So we'll build this on these layers, consisting of 2 parts brown to 1 part green, whatever I use. That'll give us heavy on the browns, light on the greens. Tends to average out close to that 30 to 1 that we're looking for. Another key component of building a good compost, a working compost, is water. I have the faucet over here as well, the hose over here as well. We're going to want to continuously water in between those layers, keeping the whole thing damp, putting that moisture into the pile, but then stopping any more from getting in. We'll keep it covered as well. Nitrogen is soluble, and we don't want that water to wash out of there, that nitrogen to be washed out of there. So for the KISS method, to build a compost, if we want it to be hot, it's going to have to be 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, 12 cubic feet, 27 cubic feet. It's got to be 3 feet high and wide. So you're going to want at least a 3 foot tall compost to be able to hold that energy, to get hot enough and stay hot enough. You're going to want to stir that compost a few times to take the stuff from the inside that's already been heated up enough to the outside, and stuff on the outside that hasn't to the inside, to make sure that we're getting all those weed seeds and things that need to be broken down in the heat to the inside. We're going to want to keep that water from washing through there, so keeping it wet in the beginning and only adding water when we stir it if need be. You shouldn't. If you've got it covered well, put a tarp over it. We have a little roof over it here. So I think we'll go ahead and build the compost now and have a look at it. Start with a layer of clean straw. So I went ahead and added this old compost. It's already full of the red wigglers. Just loaded with them. We've had them here for so many years now. So those guys are in that old hot compost. When that originally gets hot, they'll go to the outsides of it. As it cools, they'll go back to the inside. And as I'm stirring this, I realize it's not broken down all the way. There's quite a bit of straw left in there. So I've gone ahead and added that to the compost we're making. And I'll put layers of that in as well. So I'll continue those 2/3 brown, 1/3 green. We'll add a layer of compost in there as well. Okay, now we've harvested this comfrey. I'll be able to add this comfrey into the layers as well, bringing more of that green, that nitrogen in, as well as all those minerals from the deep taproot that it has, going down real deep and mining those minerals, bring up, storing it in these leaves, and now we're adding these to the compost. Watering in between every layer. It's good and saturated. Don't want any dry pockets. So now we've got that On top of the original layers, we've added a couple scoops of the old compost. It's not completely finished. You're bringing all that beneficial. Some comfrey, a layer of comfrey, to bring in those other minerals and nutrients from down deep in the garden bed. Another layer of fresh straw, clean straw. And we'll just begin the whole process again, working it up in those layers. 2/3 brown, 1/3 green, add some compost. So I forgot to mention is cardboard. Try to make sure that's just paper tape, so that's alright. Get the plastic tapes off of it, make sure it's not painted. I use some painted, not too much. Don't put it in a hole, it'll stop the water. But I throw strips in there. The cardboard's great because of these corrugated channels. The red wigglers go in there and lay their eggs in there. So it gives your number of worms really goes up when you use cardboard in your pile. So use cardboard in the red wiggler bin and in the compost pile. This is another brown for us. All right, so there's the final compost using the 2/3 brown, 1/3 green method to get our nitrogen and our carbon ratios as close to correct as we can using the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. So rather than trying to calculate each material you put in there, it's almost impossible. Instead, we keep in mind how thick the layers are and which kind of material that layer is, a brown or a green. Straw is brown. Straw with chicken shit in it, it's a green. Food scraps are a green. Garden waste, if dried, can be a brown. Fresh garden waste is a green. So by using that compost tea and top dressing these beds with that compost, we've created an amazing amount of fertility here. So we mentioned the hot compost. I've mentioned that even if the nitrogen to carbon ratios weren't correct and you piled organic matter, it'd still break down and become soil. It'd just take longer, a year or two. Take as long as that material took. Another thing we have is a worm compost. This is a 2-bin design we use. So I'm starting to feed from this top one now. Those worms are small, you probably can't make them out, baby worms. So they're making their way from this bottom bin into this top bin. But this is something we use for everyday food scraps. There's a nice pile of worms. These are red wigglers, they're a small worm. So inside of this bottom bin, which is just finishing now, Some more finished compost. Some of the woody bits haven't broken down yet. Some of those wood chips. But the rest is gorgeous. So at that point, that's ready to use. You can see there's still a few worms in it. But most of the worms have left this because that food source is gone. We stopped feeding this bin a while ago. Started feeding this bin. So there's holes throughout this and this one. So they climb from where the food was to where the new food's being presented, leaving this beautiful finished compost behind. Then we know when to harvest it. Thank you, buddy. That's red wiggler there. That's red wiggler there. They're a much smaller worm. That's a good size red wiggler right there. That's a well-fed red wiggler right there. Lots of fruit and lettuce and food scraps. We'll put him back to work. So there it is. This is red wiggler compost. Earthworm castings, better known as earthworm castings. Black gold. Just gorgeous garden fertilizer. I top dress my plants with it. I dry it out, mix it with sand, and use it for making seed for my seed starts and young plants before I transplant them. I use it by itself sometimes or with a hot compost. Put it in water with molasses and bubbled to make a beautiful compost tea out of it. Spray in the garden, like I said. It's just this gorgeous soil. But you know there's enough humus in it. There's a baby worm. You know there's enough humus in it because it stays together. So you give it a squeeze, it should crumble. It's like that. Okay, in closing, that was our compost pile. The ratios we used to build it, the materials available to us. Other things you could throw in there are garden waste, weeds, your greens when they're freshly cut, your leaves, that'd be a brown. And in doing so, we're collecting those waste products rather than taking your leaves to the curb or your food to the trash. We're creating abundance within our backyards, taking a waste product and creating surplus with it. That's a permaculture principle, turning waste into surplus. If you'd like this video, please like and share. Subscribe. This is Fat Ninja Farm. Peace. Be kind to one another.